Thanks for listening to our daily podcast. If you love what you're hearing and you want more, you can get all 3 daily hours ad-free and on demand for less than $3 per month. Go to michaelmedved.com and subscribe today. We have a special deal right now, 50% off an annual membership. Our program covers all the current controversies in the news with my independent and uncensored views. Become a MedHead member today. Find out more at michaelmedved.com. That's michaelmedved.com.
From pop culture to politics, this is the Michael Medved Show.
And another great day in this greatest nation on God's green earth, a great day where there is some good news in the field of law enforcement. There was over the weekend a fairly terrible crime that struck the largest synagogue, the largest Jewish place of worship, and the oldest Jewish place of worship in the state of Mississippi. In Jackson, Mississippi, authorities have now arrested a suspect who confessed to setting that fire to Temple Beth Israel congregation. The arsonist who set that fire said he did it because that synagogue had Jewish ties. And when he says Jewish ties, he means associations. He's not talking about the kind of neck garment that people wear when they come to services. This is appalling. Somebody sees a place called a synagogue and seems to be shocked and horrified that it has ties to Judaism. Well, that's kind of what the synagogue is about. The suspect allegedly ignited Beth Israel congregation, the state's largest and oldest Jewish house of worship, early Saturday morning using gasoline, causing heavy damage to the structure, according to the FBI. Prosecutors say the arsonist could face up to 20 years in prison if convicted as charged. Federal, state, and local authorities are investigating together following a troubling rise in anti-Semitic attacks in recent years. This goes to those people who believe that right now talking about anti-Semitism is not important because it's not a real problem or a real factor or a rising concern among Jewish people and among Americans in general. I will tell you that the idea that it's impossible not to worry about attacks and arson and vandalism and destruction. When I go often with my grandchildren to our local neighborhood congregation here, and it's just appalling, frankly. And speaking of appalling, President Trump has said that any country doing business with Iran will now face a 25% tariff on any and all business being done with the United States of America. That new tariff on imports from Iran's trading partners is effective immediately, Trump said in one of his many Truth Social posts over the last few days. And the situation in Iran is appalling. President Trump said, according to Associated Press, he said earlier today that he has canceled talks with Iranian officials amid a protest crackdown, telling Iranian citizens help is on its way. Okay, what kind of help can he provide to Iranian citizens? Does it really help the protesters to add tariff penalties to other countries that are dealing with Iran and doing business with Iran? President Trump did not offer any details about what the help would mean, the help that is supposedly on the way. And it comes after the Republican president earlier this week said Iran wants to negotiate with Washington after his threat to strike the Islamic Republic. The Islamic Republic has killed more than 2,000, according to some human rights monitors. There are some sources inside Iran that says, no, it's not 2,000. The International Editorial Board, Iran International Editorial Board, has published a statement entitled "The Killing of 12,000 Iranians Will Not Be Buried in Silence." The setting and out its findings on the latest crackdown and calling for documents and for testimony. The full text of the statement: Iran is under a coordinated blackout aimed not only at security control, but at concealing the truth. Internet cuts, crippled communications, media shutdowns, and intimidation of journalists and witnesses point to one goal: presenting a vast and historic crime from being seen. Okay, this is extremely important and deeply relevant. And President Trump, this is according to Fox News, President Trump said Sunday that Iran is starting to cross U.S. red lines, citing reports of civilian deaths and warning that any attack on American interests would be met with overwhelming force as his administration weighs what he called very strong options. The options have to do, most people assume, with seizing oil tankers and stopping the shipment of oil, which is one of the things that keeps the Iranian economy going at all. So suddenly this would make the economic situation in Iran even more appalling amidst the reports of civilian deaths and warnings that any attacks on American interests would be met with overwhelming force. Trump spoke to reporters aboard Air Force One while traveling from Palm Beach, Florida, back to Washington, D.C., after being asked whether Iran had crossed a threshold that would trigger a response. He said, "They're starting to, it looks like, and there seem to be some people killed that aren't supposed to be killed." Who's supposed to be killed? I mean, this is truly bizarre. The front page of the New York Times featured a fairly horrifying photograph of body bags just stocked up of dead protesters. They're starting to, says President Trump, it looks like, and there seem to be some people killed that aren't supposed to be killed. Someone should ask him, who is it you think in Iran who is supposed to be killed? These are violent. If you call them leaders, I don't know if they're leaders or just if they rule through violence. And we're looking at some very strong options. We'll make a determination. We will find out about that, and it could be a very serious matter, because despite the fact that the United States in the 12-day war against Iran, in which we participated along with our allies in Israel, even though that did a important job in reducing the threat of nuclear capacity on the part of Iran, what this shows is how important that kind of mission proved to be. Because imagine what the United States would be constrained toward in terms of dealing with Iran if the Iranians had a credible nuclear threat. There is some criticism of President Trump and Vice President Vance for fanning the flames. Where and how? We will get to that and more coming up on The Medved Show. And on the Michael Medved Show, we are facing a situation in Iran that is terrifying. The lowest estimate of the death toll right now is 2,000 people having been killed. What's so striking about that is we're used to hearing about battles between Hamas and Israel, between Ukraine and Russia, but most of the casualties in those cases are not civilians. It's not civilians versus the government of the country. That is the situation here. And no one knows because they have cut off all of the communication, the internet communication, and other forms of communication. What exactly is going on in Iran is unclear. But President Trump tried to make it clear and to give a forceful declaration about the consequences for the Iranian regime. This is ABC News covering President Trump's statement this morning about Iran. Clip 16.
This morning, the Trump administration weighing options against Iran in the wake of a growing massacre of unarmed civilians calling for change. According to U.S. officials, new sanctions are on the table against key regime officials, cyber attacks and influence operations also in play, as well as potential strikes on military targets. Iran's foreign minister shifting blame, saying demonstrations have turned violent because Trump said he would intervene if there was bloodshed. Human rights activists reporting at least 2,000 people have been killed since the protest began 2 weeks ago, over 10,000 arrested. The unrest sparked by a deepening cost of living crisis with massive inflation and a collapsing currency. Now, an internet blackout imposed to try to stop the flow of information, but activists say protests ongoing. Dr. Kayvan Miradi, an Iranian-American doctor in the U.S., says he's in touch with doctors inside Iran's hospitals who've made contact via the satellite service Starlink.
They said bodies and bodies of dead people just coming in. There's no place for the morgue to even put them.
This is a very grim. President Trump declares that help is on its way, but the effectiveness of that help is very much in question. Because we have our own problem. Thank God it is not comparable to Iran. But it is a problem here in the United States with a very clear divide in this country about what happened in Minneapolis. And what happened in Minneapolis, the idea of blaming this again and again and again on the victim of the shooting is sad and distressing and, in fact, alarming. There is a fine column by David French, known as a defender of religious liberty, someone associated with the best of the conservative movement for years. He writes in the New York Times under the heading, Trump and Vance are fanning the flames. Again. What does David French mean by that? He writes, President Trump is putting on a clinic about how to break the United States. There are few things in American life more divisive than controversies over police violence. That is why responsible leaders respond to every incident with care. You lament the lives lost. You promise a fair, thorough investigation. And you call for calm. You do not prejudge the case. You do not set up an expectation that justice will be done only if your side's interests are vindicated. And you definitely do not send out allies and subordinates to whip up anger. even if you follow that playbook perfectly, you say just the right words, you do the right things, violence can still erupt. That's how fraught this issue is, writes David French. But Trump isn't a responsible leader. And he's not, and he is at his absolute worst in a crisis, writes David French. Trump lies. He inflames his base. And most dangerous of all, he pits the federal government against states and cities, treating them not as partners in constitutional governance, but as hostile inferiors that must be brought to heel. That's exactly what has happened in the hours and days since an ICE agent shot and killed Renee Good on the streets of Minneapolis on Wednesday. Instantly, the administration's narrative locked in. In a Truth Social post published mere hours after Good's death, Trump said that Good, quote, violently, willfully, and viciously ran over the ICE officer who seems to have shot her in self-defense. The president said that it was hard to believe that the ICE agent, who was recorded walking around after the incident, apparently unharmed, was alive. The statements from senior administration officials were even worse. Kristi Noem, the Secretary of Homeland Security, said that Good committed an act of, quote, domestic terrorism. Not to be undone, Vice President J.D. Vance called it classic terrorism. But if you watch videos of the shooting, one thing is clear. No fair-minded person could possibly watch that incident and conclude that Good was a domestic terrorist on a mission to run down ICE agents. The administration's claims of terrorism are false, absurdly so. Good's SUV was blocking part of a road, and she appeared to signal for other traffic to go around her when an ICE vehicle approached. Agents approached her car. One said, "Get out of the car," using an expletive. An eyewitness, however, said that she heard conflicting instructions. One agent yelling to Good to get out of the car, while another agent told her to drive away. As one of the agents places his hand on the Good's door handle, she backs up slightly, turns her wheels away from the agents in a direction to leave, and starts driving forward. At that moment, an agent who had positioned himself in front of her vehicle sidesteps around it and fires what sound like 3 quick shots at Good. The Minnesota videos show that it was never necessary for the officer to open fire. If a first shot is taken after an officer is out of the path of the vehicle, that shot is not necessary to save his life. In fact, dodging a vehicle rather than attempting to stop it with gunfire is the preferred course of action for federal law enforcement. More on the impact of the administration's distortions on this issue and the increasing and intensifying controversy on the Medved Show. And on the Michael Medved Show, there is breaking news about federal prosecutors in Minnesota. We will get to that in just a moment. I wanted to finish the argument that is made so very forcefully by David French in the New York Times. And he writes about the absurdity of the administration, J.D. Vance, President Trump, Kristi Noem, this McLaughlin, who is one of the spokespeople for the Department of Homeland Security. They all insist on some guilt on the part of Renee Good that provoked her own killing. She is a victim. She is not a perpetrator here. And they David French writes, even video that appears to have been taken from the shooter's angle, which emerged Friday, doesn't resolve this particular controversy. It shows Good smiling at the agent and telling him that she is not mad at him. It shows her moving her car toward him as someone, possibly her wife, tells her to drive. And it also shows the shooter sidestepping the car even as he opens fire. But we don't have video yet from the other agents. We don't know why the agent moved in front of the vehicle rather than staying to the side as the other agents did. We don't know the training the agent received. We simply cannot and should not prejudge the agent's case if it even becomes a case. But that brings us back, says David French, to this administration's malice and recklessness. There is zero indication that it intends to conduct a rigorous investigation. All of its public energy is directed toward demonizing the victim, Renee Good, and defending the agent. Even worse, the federal government has been taking steps to impede Minnesota's own investigation of the shooting. It can be difficult for a state government to prosecute a federal agent who commits a crime while on duty. But it's not impossible. At the very least, there is a strong state interest in investigating the incident to provide the public with a thorough, accurate, and complete account of Good's death. Isn't that logical and fair and appropriate? This produces the kind of tension that can break a nation, writes David French. When a government oppresses its citizens and cuts off access to justice, it places an unbearable strain on the system. On Wednesday, J.D. Vance posted on X, quote, "You can accept that this woman's death is a tragedy while acknowledging it's a tragedy of her own making." What did she do exactly? But it was not a tragedy of Good's making. She did not shoot herself, and the ICE agent did not have to shoot her to save himself. That a woman does not comply with law enforcement commands, especially when she may have been hearing conflicting instructions, does not mean that her life is forfeit. And he concludes, to the worst parts of MAGA, including people who exert immense power over American life, your worth is defined by your obedience. And those who don't obey, well, they deserve to die, and no one should mourn their death. Well, there are people in Minnesota who are mourning her death and people working for the federal government. The breaking news, 6 federal prosecutors in Minnesota resigned today over the Justice Department's push to investigate the widow of a woman killed by an ICE agent and the department's reluctance to investigate the shooter, according to people with knowledge of their decision. Joseph H. Thompson, the prosecutor who was second in command at the U.S. Attorney's Office and oversaw a sprawling fraud investigation that has roiled Minnesota's political landscape, was among those who quit today, according to 3 people with knowledge of the decision. Mr. Thompson's resignation came after senior Justice Department officials pressed for a criminal investigation into the actions of the widow of Renee Nicole Good, the Minneapolis woman killed by an ICE agent on Wednesday. And no investigation centering on the shooter? There was an investigation and comments on Congress, the part of a House Judiciary Committee hearing, in which Steve Cohen, who is a Democrat from Tennessee, he used that judiciary hearing to denounce the, quote, unjustified homicide of Renee Good at the hands of Immigration and Customs Enforcement Officer Jonathan Ross. He asserted, Congressman Cohen, that this was clearly a homicide. Clip 66.
This was an unbelievably, clearly unjustified homicide that the administration immediately jumped on to defend the officer, but just not only defending the officer, but blaspheming the lady, Miss Good, whose name was appropriately chosen. She was a good lady. She did nothing wrong. And it's my understanding from reading the laws and being briefed on by some that the ICE agents have authority only when they have a warrant for somebody's arrest or a reasonable cause, probable cause that somebody is in the country and illegally in the country because of immigration problems. But they have no law enforcement authority whatsoever unless they've been deputized by the governor, and they had no right to try to control traffic because this did not involve an ICE operation that was being deterred in any way. When that officer came up to the car and reached in and grabbed inside and said, open up your car door, get out of your car, he had no right to do it.
Okay, and the idea that she was a domestic terrorist, Congressman Cohen went on. This is clip 2.
In the appearance of law enforcement, intimidate people when they have no right to do it. That was a violation of the law, and she had every right not to do it. And when she drove off, the man in front of her who shouldn't have been there, that was insane, he was responding to her wife who had said, dude, why don't you go get lunch? He didn't like that, so he decided to shoot. He had his gun out almost before she started to drive forward, and it was clear she was turning to the right. This was an unjustified homicide in our country that we've all seen. And the administration jumps in and says, we're going to attack this woman and call her a domestic terrorist. She's a victim who is not with us anymore. She's dead because an officer of the United States of America killed her, and it's been on video, and we've all seen it, and we've seen our president, our vice president, and Cruella Gnome go after her as if she was some type of domestic terrorist. They've attacked her before her body's in the ground.
Okay, coming up, there is more about why ICE left the crime scene and whether this is correct to be seen as a battle between ICE against the American people at large. That's somewhat over the top. And plus, Bill Clinton refusing to testify to the House Epstein investigation. We'll get to that and more coming up on the Medved Show. And coming up, a little bit more about the reactions in Congress, in the House Judiciary Committee, to the continuing controversy concerning the killing of an American citizen, a civilian, someone without, to the very best of my knowledge, and I think we would certainly have heard about it beforehand, any criminal record at all. She was a member of an organization called ICE Watch, which was meant to alert people that ICE agents were on the way and to make sure that they were prepared with proper documentation, et cetera, et cetera. And that's the story about blowing whistles. The idea that there was a hostile reaction to the ICE officers who were trying to do their job in Minnesota is based upon the idea that they were blowing whistles, which I think is not the most difficult challenge that ICE personnel have been forced to confront. Meanwhile, those ICE officers, having been aware, the three of them, certainly the one who fired the three shots that killed Renee Good, his name was Jonathan Ross, but they were aware that someone had been severely wounded, but they left the crime scene. And this was pointed out by Steve Cohen, the Tennessee Democrat, during a House Judiciary Committee to denounce what he considers the, quote, unjustified homicide of Renee Nicole Good. This is, again, Steve Cohen, the representative from Tennessee, clip 66.3.
Any law enforcement community that I know of, certainly the Memphis Police Department, if an officer does a shooting, even if it's pretty clear that it's self-defense, they are relieved of duty pending an investigation. This man has not been relieved of anything. He was sent to the hospital by the defense counsels that they have their attorney saying, cover your CYA. And he went there to CYA. When he was walking away from the scene and going, call 911, he was walking like he was in the Olympics. He had no problem walking. And I'm telling you, for somebody who has problems walking, he was walking straight path, strong path. He was a very virile man. He had no problem walking. He didn't need to go. And then they all jumped in their car and drove away and left the crime scene. On the front end, they're directing traffic, telling her to get out of the car. He's telling her what to do and get out of the car and whatever they were yelling. And then after she's shot and they see her bleeding there, they drive off. Law enforcement doesn't drive off when somebody has been shot and is possibly dying. They try to render aid. They split. That's not America.
Okay, it shouldn't be. And then he brought back the issue to what I think is the most relevant and important aspect of this entire discussion, which is the reaction of President Trump and the idea that he already defended the shooter and condemned the victim of the shooting before any of the facts were known or all of the tape was analyzed or anything else. This is Steve Cohen again talking about President Trump's reaction to Minneapolis. Clip 4.
This is not ICE versus the people of the United States, and that's the way they're looking at it. The administration looks at ICE as our guys, and anybody they shoot is the enemy. The American public is not the enemy. They are not the enemy. And sending more ICE agents into Minneapolis now is the equivalent of what they did when the man from Afghanistan, who was here legally for many, many years, shot and killed the lady from Oklahoma, who was with the National Guard, and killed her here in Washington, D.C. And Trump had to admit, he said, there's been no killing, no murders, no murders in D.C. since we've been here. He said there was that one killing. Well, it was one killing because the lady was there because Donald Trump brought her to D.C. and she was killed by Afghanistan. And then nobody from Afghanistan can come in the country anymore because one person does something wrong is not a reason to penalize every person like that. And that's where they're coming from. This is a war against America and against due process and against justice. I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back.
Okay, but one of the reports that is out now indicate that Renee Good was, in fact, involved with an organization called ICE Watch, an activist group monitoring immigration and customs enforcement operations in Minnesota, though officials described her differently as either a legal observer or an agitator blocking agents during the incident where she was fatally shot. Sources show she connected with these anti-ICE groups through her child's school, which encouraged social activism and participated in actions to counter ICE raids. Key details: activist involvement. Good was linked to ICE Watch, a coalition focused on confronting ICE. A role: some officials and reports described her role as a legal observer, while others, including Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem and President Trump, called her an interfering agitator, blocking agents. Incident: she was killed by an ICE agent in Minneapolis while reportedly involved in an operation where she used her vehicle to impede agents. Now, using her vehicle to impede agents when she was backing up and driving away from the agents at the time she was shot is not an indication that she was actively engaged in trying to interfere with what they were doing. There's also this, that the facts on ICE, Immigration and Customs Enforcement, this operation, ICE, Immigration and Customs Enforcement, does not have the legal authority to arrest or deport U.S. citizens like Nicole Good. Their power is limited to non-citizens, but in practice, citizens have been mistakenly detained, often due to confusion or obstruction, so it's crucial for citizens to carry proof of citizenship and assert their rights if questioned by ICE agents. Also, ICE cannot legally detain, arrest, or deport U.S. citizens, as their authority applies only to non-citizens. However, citizens can be temporarily stopped or questioned and should assert their citizenship while knowing their rights, such as refusing searches without probable cause and demanding to speak with a lawyer to avoid wrongful detention or interference charges, though errors have occurred. And meanwhile, the Daily Mail has a headline that the ICE agent who shot the woman dead is not expected to face criminal charges, as the FBI zeroes in on the victim's history of Trump hating. A history of Trump hating. There are some, 70 million people who have voted against Trump in the most recent election. And does that constitute a history of Trump hating and mean that her killing was appropriate? Meanwhile, on another issue, the Representative James Comer, Republican, speaking to reporters at the Capitol today, had some revelations about Bill Clinton and his relationship with Jeffrey Epstein. We will get to that coming up on the Michael Medved Show. And we will also go forward with more on the Republicans who are defending President Trump and his battle with the head of the Federal Reserve, a battle which has drawn some serious criticism, even from people who are very much part of the MAGA coalition. There is also questions and coming in from emailers about what my view is specifically of what happened in Minneapolis. We will get to that because I want to make that incredibly clear. Meanwhile, there's also a Gallup poll that shows a new all-time high of 45% in America identify themselves as political independents. What would be the reason for that? An all-time high. We get to that and to more coming up in This Greatest Nation on God's Green Earth.